Why did so many Germans immigrate to the United States? What's up guys, I'm Potato Phil, I am from Germany and I react to all kinds of American stuff. So this video is right up our alley right here. I'm curious, I haven't watched it and I'm very bad at history, to be honest. So 43 million Germans on the thumbnail, that would be half of our country currently with about 83 million population. But let's just get right into it and see why they all went.
According to the United States Census Bureau, the largest ethnic group in the United States of America is German. In 2019, a whopping 43 million Americans described themselves as being of full or partial German ancestry, with Pennsylvania alone accounting for 3.5 million. So, there is no doubt that at some point in time, there were a lot of German immigrants crossing the Atlantic to reach America.
Seems like
but
it.
What exactly was the reason? What made so many Germans decide to leave all they'd ever known and owned behind to start a new life in the United States of America? The first notable wave of German settlers in the American colonies came near the end of the 17th century when William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, invited religious outcasts from Germany to come and settle in his colony. Many, facing religious persecution back home, eagerly accepted the invitation. For the following decades, German immigration to the colony would steadily increase. For the most part, these settlers were emigrating from the more southwestern regions of Germany, such as Baden, Württemberg, Palatinate, and the Rhineland. But they would not be the only Germans to make their way to Pennsylvania. By midway through the 1700s, these settlers had founded multiple cities, such as Germantown, Skipack, and Conestoga. Upwards of 65,000 Germans had only recently made their way to the welcoming colony by the 1770s. But unfortunately, the influx of German immigrants would drastically decrease as the colonies inched closer and closer to the Revolutionary War. Numerous of the tens of thousands of settlers had left Germany not just for religious freedom, but also to flee from the effects of the 30 Years' War and subsequent conflicts that plagued Germany. Seeing such a large-scale war then break out in the New World, the dream of a new, safe, and promising home was shattered for many. For those who had already arrived in the colonies, though, life was not horrible. Though challenging, it seems that success in the New World was a true possibility for the hard-working immigrants. According to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, the typical German immigrant was a poor farmer or artisan who arrived around 1750 with a wife and 2 children. They were most likely in debt for the passage across the Atlantic, but had family or friends already settled in America. They were affiliated with the Lutheran or Reformed Church, but only loosely committed to an organized religion. Records indicate that they became prosperous members of the community. However, many were too poor to pay the transatlantic passage, so as many...
That was my first thought was, if they are from like working class people, who took them? How much was it back in the day? Could they afford it? And how was that journey? Probably very treacherous.
As 1/2 to 2/3 of German immigrants came to Pennsylvania as indentured servants or redemptioners, as Germans called them. These redemptioners were essentially contracted servants for generally between 2 to 7 years, who would be forced to work for a particular employer to make up for the debts they owed and had incurred from their trip to
contracted servants
America. And by the time the German influx had slowed, there were already, according to some historians, nearly 75,000 Germans living in Pennsylvania. There had been an almost constant trickle of Germans entering the New World ever since the founding of Jamestown, and even some of the German Hessian soldiers that had been employed by the British during the American Revolution had decided to stay in the United States at the end of the war. During the early 1800s, more Germans had begun to make their way to America, though not in as large of waves due to famine back home. Others would come a few decades later due to the political strife in Germany, and during the 1850s, roughly 1 million Germans arrived in the United States.
It's a very quick video. It's like the typical reasons that see people emigrate from a country, basically either religious reasons, being persecuted for something, or just looking for a better life, opportunity. I don't know exactly when that American dream, you know, you can be whatever you want, with the gold rush and stuff happened. I think that was probably a little later than this. I'm absolutely not sure. But I wonder how big the reputation was like mid-18th century.
Making the total number of German-born Americans by the 1860s around 1.3 million. In the 1870s, over 100,000 Germans from Russia found their way to America after the Tsarist government stripped away privileges that had been granted to German farmers in Russia hundreds of years prior. The next decade would outshine all the rest, though, as around 1.5 million Germans came to the US just in the 1880s alone. This would be the peak, though, as the number of German-born Americans dropped from 2.9 million to 2.3 million between 1890 and 1910. Immigration had gone down drastically, and in 1920, the number had fallen even further, now sitting at 1.7 million. And even with the side effects of displacement caused by World War II, Americans born in Germany still only added up to 1.2 million after the start of the conflict.
Guys, quick interruption here. If you are fascinated by the United States and all these American topics like I am, then maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I am a small channel. I'm trying to grow and I'm trying to learn about the United States, and I find it very interesting. And if you do too, then please click that button. But now back to the video.
Germans would continue to immigrate over the following decades, as they still do today, but the number of them coming to America has nevertheless dropped remarkably.
Yeah, I wonder what it is
in 1990, only 58 million Americans claimed to be German or partially German, even though others could be linked to German ancestors. But still, even if the number of Germans coming into America had already reached its high point, they have undoubtedly had a huge impact on the country. And it does seem that German remains the most dominant ethnic group in the country. The reasons for their migration are multiple. One reason that is often overlooked, though didn't account for the first wave of immigrants, was the stories told by Germans who had already made their new lives in America with great success. From Gottfried Duden's book to simple letter correspondence between German immigrants and those they knew back home, people in Germany began to hear about the opportunities and freedoms that the colonies and later United States had to offer. Simple word of mouth is often all it takes. For many, the feudal system back home left them yearning for more independence, as did other restrictions that have been placed on some, such as limits on marriages due to a fear of overpopulation and a worsening economy. But the economy was already bad enough for numerous people. High taxes were a constant burden, and making a respectable living just seemed more likely in the New World, with news of land being given to new settlers and industrialization later opening the door for more jobs outside of the typical farming.
Yeah, I think that's what he's talking about. The land of opportunity, the word of mouth, you know, correspondence. Imagine that there's this new world over the ocean that is being explored and discovered by people, and they're all having the opportunity to become rich and make a good living and whatever. It must have been crazy in a time where all of this information that we have today was not available, you know, and you just hear about these things and you can only imagine them, you know. In your imagination it must grow into something, and at some point you want to go. Understandable.
Furthermore, some communities in the German states were eager to get rid of the lower class anyway, and would even offer to cover the costs of the journey to America if the immigrants promised to never return home. Other German men left illegally due to military service requirements, while more fled famine and frequent wars. And of course, as demonstrated by many of the original immigrants to the New World, religious freedom was often an important motivator. At the time, many were essentially told what to believe in, Catholicism or Protestantism, for example, by each monarch. For those with strong alternative beliefs who were unwilling to comply, fleeing the country became a way for them to practice their faith in peace. Not only did the American colonies have freedom of religion, but as stated earlier, the founder of Pennsylvania himself had even invited these religious outcasts to settle in his colony. Of course, many reasons exist as to why people of any country immigrate to another, and this is far from an exhaustive list, though it is some of the main explanations that have been discovered. Without German immigrants, for example, Americans may not share the tradition of decorated Christmas trees, and the Brooklyn Bridge wouldn't have been built without a German immigrant engineer, business owners, military generals, scientists. There are dozens upon dozens of names of German immigrants who took the journey across the Atlantic and changed the future of the colonies and the United States. Today, Germans still immigrate to the US on occasion, but more significantly is the lasting effects of those who had already come. 6 states are believed to have over 30% of their total populations be made up by full or partial German Americans.
That's crazy. It's the northern states, quite in the center. Maybe Germans like the weather. The cold states, you know.
Another 7 have an at least 20% ethnic German
That's
population,
crazy.
and of all 50 states, not a single one has a German population that makes up less than 4.5% of the state's entire population. Possibly one of the most impressive parts about this is that most immigrants from the German states have assimilated almost, if not entirely, into German American culture and identity, meaning that there really hasn't been an intentional preservation of German identity in America, though
That's a
some
good
German
point.
heritage societies and communities exist. For the most part, it's all thanks to the millions of people who braved the waters to start a new life in the United States that have made so much of America's roots German.
Nice picture. It's a good point that so many people have the ancestry of America, and it took me to go to America and also to start making YouTube videos to realize how many people in the US have roots in Germany, and also Americans are very aware of their ancestry. All these ancestry trees and books that a lot of families have, that is not quite as common here. We have it too, but I feel like in America, because it's a full country of immigrants from everywhere, it's very much more normal, popular to do these things and research your ancestry. And we get so many comments from people that watch our videos saying, hey, I am an American living in Pennsylvania, I'm an American living in Texas, whatever, but my family is of German ancestry. And I was very surprised by that, because when you just watch Hollywood and movies and media, whatever we got fed in the 90s and the 2000s, we consume a lot from America, right? But they don't emphasize this. And so I went and I didn't know about it, but apparently a lot of ancestry, which, yeah, I guess is kind of cool. And it's also kind of nice that everybody seemed to assimilate properly and not, you know, make it a second Germany. So yeah, interesting video. A little quick. I would love a little more comparison maybe with population sizes at the times and what's going on, you know, but it's a 10-minute video. Bottom line is I didn't know how many Germans went to the US and started a new life there, but yeah, that dream was very prevalent in some centuries, I guess. Yeah. Thank you. I'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye.